Six old chestnuts. Before I discuss this concept, we need to understand and appreciate that governance, in its essence, governance is an act of harmonization. Governance is an act of adjustment, reconciliation, conflict management. It is not about exercise of authority. That can be just ostensible or a little bit of superficial definition that governance is a process of exercising authority. In its core, it is about harmonizing the conflict of interest, be it between two individuals, two groups and communities, between two regions, and wherever you find conflicting parties. So governance, public administration, very frequently come across a situation like dilemmas, you can say, where you are exposed to a situation where two extremes are there and you have to strike fine balance between the two. Very frequently, public administrators, policymakers, they are exposed to this kind of situation, that whether to go for centralization or to go for decentralization, whether to focus more on equity and justice or to focus more on efficiency, whether to focus more on facts or to focus more on values. So very frequently, public administration, governance are exposed to this kind of situation. And before we move ahead, we need to appreciate that public administration, unlike private administration, has a far more complex contextual setting, because public administration is not merely concerned with production, storage or sale of goods and services or profit maximization. Public administration operates in a society wherein it needs to reflect that ethical moral considerations of that society, its value system, in its action, because it affects and it gets affected. People look up to public administration not only for goods and services, but many more things. People look at public administration with an expectation that not only you will accomplish goals and objectives pertaining to welfare, development and security, but you will also follow the ways and means which can stand the scrutiny of ethics or morality or the legal requirements and the concern for justice and many more things. It means public administration, unlike private administration, is exposed to a very wide range of challenges. They have to be very much careful, not only regarding the goals which are chosen for accomplishment, but also the means that they deploy to accomplish certain goals. If you set the goals very high, you fail to accomplish that, then you will be beaten up black and blue by the society. If you do not set goals, then you will be criticized for being directionless or deficient in terms of vision and mission. So public administration governance is exposed to a wide range of challenges. So this six old chestnuts, this is the concept introduced by B. Guy Peters, one of the renowned political scientists, in his book, The Future of Governing. So this concept, the six old chestnuts, it basically deals with those dilemmas, recurring and persistent dilemmas to which public administration and the governance is exposed to. Whether to go for this side, this end, or for that matter, or that end. So these are the recurring dilemmas all over the world. Public administration, more particularly in a modern democratic welfare state, wherein the public administration has to provide goods and services to the society, but in a way and manner which stand the scrutiny of legal requirement or financial requirement, or that stand the scrutiny of customs, tradition, or the value system, a lot many things. So therefore, public administration and governance in any modern democratic welfare state is exposed to this kind of dilemmas. These kind of dilemmas, persistent and recurring dilemmas, whether to go for centralization or to go for decentralization or to go for representativeness or neutral competence, expertise or democracy, equity or efficiency. Then you have stability and change. There are different lines of thought. Some scholars would say, many scholars hold the view that actually these are not dilemmas, and this is not like centralization versus decentralization. Actually, all these values are not opposite to one another, but in togetherness, it appears that they are opposite to each other, but in reality, in togetherness, they constitute one integrated concept. There cannot be centralization without decentralization. No decentralization can be successful without centralization. You talk about efficiency and equity. Efficiency in public administration governance is not about minimum input and maximum output. Efficiency in public administration has a ethical and moral underpinnings. It means being fair and being equitous is also the part of the efficiency in public administration. So there are different views. So it is easier, said than done. You can say that these are complementary to one another. These are not the opposite values. Understandable, but in practical terms, you don't go for too much of analysis of philosophical side, these and that. But in general, most of the organizations are exposed to this kind of challenges because centralization and decentralization, or expertise or democracy, all such things have their own merits and demerits. We know very well that you need to strike fine balance. We know that one needs to strike fine balance between the two extreme values. But the challenge is this, that the point of balance is not always in the middle. The point of balance itself is not balanced. It is not always in the middle. The point of balance in the given situation may tilt more towards centralization, or sometimes point of balance would shift more towards decentralization. So point of balance is not something like a mathematical sense, 50% or 50%, something like this, that 50% of centralization, 50% of decentralization. Okay, and this is a very balanced system. No, in the context of administration and governance, and in the physical science also, you can say the point of balance shifts. आप सीधी साइकिल चला रहे हैं तो point of balance बिल्कुल मिडिल में है, लेकिन अगर आप पार्क के इर्द गिर्द अगर साइकिल चला रहे हैं, सर्कुलर पाथ अगर है, तो point of balance फिर थोड़ा शिफ्ट करेगा इधर, या फिर साइकिल चलाते हैं उधर, ये होगा. एग्जैक्ट गवर्नेंस में भी ऐसा होता है. कभी कभी इन द गिवन सिचुएशन द प्रिंसिपल ऑफ बैलेंस डिमांड्स that you move more towards centralization or you go towards more of decentralization. Governance में कभी कभी ऐसा होता है कि freedom of speech and expression, कभी कभी balancing act का मतलब ये होता है कि you need to curtail freedom of speech and expression. Perhaps you have considered too much. People are taking undue advantage of freedom of speech and expression, and sometimes you need to balancing out means you need to expand the scope of freedom of speech and expression. So sometimes expansion is required to reach the point of balance, or sometimes contraction is required to reach the point of balance. So everybody knows that principle of balance has a universal relevance. Principle of balance, to avoid the extremes, identify the middle point, but the middle point is not always in the middle. This is the challenge. So therefore the policymakers, administrators, the political leadership, they need to examine the given situation, ecological conditions of administration, socio-economic conditions, the cultural values, the moral values, domestic problems and challenges, different communities, different interest, conflict, then domestic interest, and then foreign interest, the legal aspect, then legal and constitutional aspect, financial aspect. Lot many things are required to be taken into consideration, and then you choose a course of action which is, compared to other courses of action, which is much more likely to lead to accomplishment of objectives in the best possible manner or reasonably good manner. It means with list of friction, list of conflict. Very smoothly the goals are accomplished with list of potential damage for your future interest. So because every decision, every course of action will certainly have its byproduct, will certainly have its cost. So minimization of that cost, that is the thing that we keep in our mind, and we choose a particular course of action. So public administration and governance is not such a simple thing. It's a very complex affair. So 6 Old Chestnuts. Big Guy Peters, he basically emphasizes the 6 Old Chestnuts refer to these six persistent and recurring dilemmas in front of the administrators, public administration governance all over the world, most of the countries, what to do, because centralization or decentralization, representativeness or neutral competence, all such things have their own merits and demerits. So, what are the dilemmas and how do we come out of that? The first is like centralization versus decentralization. Centralization versus decentralization, representativeness versus neutral competence, centralization versus decentralization. What is the dilemma? Whether to go for concentration of power authority in the hands of few sitting at the top, or to disperse the power authority at different levels along vertical line and horizontal line to create different centers of decision making, independent centers of decision making. What to do? To concentrate authority at one place or to disperse the authority? This is the first dilemma which is faced by most of the organization. Because if you go for centralization, then what are the merits? That you can easily achieve unity of direction and purpose, you can achieve standardization, you can have better control, better coordination. So centralization has this kind of advantages. And if you go for decentralization, so decentralization would mean that dispersal of power and authority. You create more than one centers of decision making. Getting a point? Decentralization means dispersal of power and authority to such an extent that you create independent centers of decision making along vertical and horizontal and different positions. No doubt, decentralization leads to better responsiveness, because if you share authority in favor of your subordinates or the other departments or the functionaries at different levels, it means given the power and authority which is shared, they will be able to decide the things on their own and they can respond to the situation in a much better way. So decentralization improves the level of responsiveness, the level of efficiency. Everything is not required to be brought at the topmost position for decision making. So decisions are taken very fast. Honestly, responsiveness and efficiency. And one more thing, that the subordinates at different levels, they are more proximate to ground realities. So the possibility is this, that decisions will be far more effective. One more thing, when you disperse power and authority, you go for decentralization. Then one of the biggest advantages is this, that you train the members of organization. You gradually train the members of organization in terms of decision making ability. When they are conferred with power and authority, when they are asked to decide the things on their own. In this way, you train them in the art of decision making, and you develop and you promote. You develop a second line of leadership in the organization. That tomorrow, your subordinates, some of them will assume the responsibilities at the top, for which they can be trained only when you share power authority with them and you ask them to decide the things, to learn from your mistakes and apply correctives and take better decisions. So decentralization improves responsiveness. Through decentralization, you can improve efficiency. Through decentralization, you can reduce the burden of decision making at the top. Good number of decisions will be taken at different levels. So when you are given some space or burden is taken off your shoulders, then those who are sitting at the top, they can afford to focus more on substantive. They can focus more on substantive areas of decision making. They will have some time to focus on more important issues related to organization, its growth, its development. So decentralization had its own advantage. Then what to do? So balance is required to be struck between centralization and decentralization. There are certain subject matters regarding which you may go for centralization, and there are other subject matters wherein you can afford to go for decentralization. So this is the dilemma which is faced by most of the organizations. They are required to decide between centralization and decentralization. And this is something that actually decide the structure of organization. It registers direct implication for the structure of organization. Organization may be top heavy. If you go for centralization, it means concentration of authority of decision making at the top. So organization will be top heavy. It means too much of authority at the top and too less of authority at the base. Point is clear? Or it can be like less of authority at the top, a very balanced dispersal of authority at the topmost position, at the middle level, at the lower level. It will have implications for the balance or stability of the organization. Designing an organization is very much like designing a car. When you design a car, you are required to ensure. I don't know much about car designing, but I know that some sciences, scientific principles of science applied. Principles of science are applied to ensure that the weight of the car is properly dispersed on the four wheels. कहाँ पे वजन ज़्यादा पड़ेगा, कहाँ पे कम, उसके हिसाब से बहुत सारा एडजस्टमेंट होगा. लेकिन एक कार पे अगर आपने उसके डिज़ाइन पे काम अगर नहीं किया है तो वो कार बहुत ज़्यादा एक्सीडेंट प्रोन कार हो सकती है, बहुत ज़्यादा उसके कार के एक्सीडेंट होने की संभावना बहुत अधिक हो सकती है. सो डिज़ाइनिंग एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन इज़ वेरी मच लाइक डिज़ाइनिंग अ कार. एंड व्हेन इट कम्स टू डिज़ाइन एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, इट इज़ बेसिकली अबाउट taking decisions regarding the levels in the hierarchy of dispersal of power authority along vertical and horizontal line. अगर आपने बहुत ज़्यादा वेट अगर टॉप पे दिया या बहुत ज़्यादा वेट अगर बेस पे दिया तो दोनों ही स्थिति में अलग अलग तरीके से ऑर्गेनाइजेशन कमज़ोर हो सकता है और डेंजरस हो सकता है. सो दिस वन इज़ वेरी मच इंपॉर्टेंट that policymakers in the organization, they are required to decide whether to go for more of decentralization or more of centralization. Most of the organizations are not completely centralized or completely decentralized. Most of the organizations do fall between the two extremes of centralization and decentralization. In fact, no decentralization can ever be successful in the absence of centralization. A little centralization is always required. Take up the example of Earth. Centripetal force and centrifugal force, the balance between the two. If centripetal force is becomes more than centrifugal force, what will happen? It will absorb things towards the core. Okay, and too much of centrifugality, decentralization, it means what will happen, you know very well, will be floating somewhere. Clear? So this centralization. Then second thing is representativeness versus neutral competence. So whether to go for in public administration, public bodies, should we focus more on representativeness? Representativeness, it means you see the demography of different regions, different communities. Should we focus more on representation from different regions, different communities? This is more important. Or we should focus more on the neutral competence, hiring the bureaucrats, hiring the people, the persons in the bureaucracy of very high level of merit and competence without much focus on representation. So if you focus on representation, what are the advantage? The system would appear, it will give more legitimacy to the system, and it will appear like based on a consensus. It will, if it is more representative in character, it will appear that the system is more proximate to the principle of justice or equity, something like this. And if you go for neutral competence, that I am not concerned with representation from different regions or different communities or different interest group, you focus solely on merit and competence, then efficiency will be very high. You go for the neutral competence, that only you ensure representation in the bureaucracy or public bodies based on merit and competence. So it will certainly improve the level of efficiency, economy, performance, all such things are there. But it will not carry that much of legitimacy in the society. Some sections and people, groups and communities would think they may develop a sense of alienation, towards the bureaucracy or public bodies, that they have no representation from their side. So that's why this is the dilemma, and what is required to be done to strike fine balance. There are certain areas wherein you make appointments solely on the basis of merit and competence, and side by side you are expected to give representation to different interests as well. If you move too much towards representativeness, so even though the system will appear to be more legitimate, more equitous, and more representative in character, understandable, but you will have to compromise in terms of merit, competence, performance, efficiency, to the detriment of all. So here the decisions are required to be taken. And then you have expertise versus democracy. So should we focus, what is the dilemma? Should we focus more on expertise? That people with deep technical knowledge of the subject matter, they are involved in decision making. So decisions will be far more efficient and effective. Or you may go for democratic participation. It means the people at large, as far as possible, they should be given an opportunity to participate in decision making process. So if you go for democratic participation of the people in the decision making process, so that will make your decision very accommodative, and it will carry that consensual strength, but it may be deficient in terms of instrumental value. Getting a point? This is something which can be accomplished better if you depend more on technical knowledge of the experts and you decide the things. Here again, the dilemma is that whether to go for democracy or to go for expertise or democracy. Okay, then what could be the answer? Probable answer that depending on the nature of subject matter, one needs to decide whether to go for expertise or to go for democratic participation, efficiency and democracy. If you have to take a decision, policy decision, regarding nuclear energy or some nuclear deal with one other country, America or Russia, if you're going for that kind of nuclear deal, obviously you will have to depend more on the experts. And if you're deciding things related to work for, or for that matter, triple talaq or some other things, subject matters related to women empowerment or child development, etc., you can bring subject matter in public domain for debate and discussion, and you may seek public opinion and public participation in decision-making process. So this is also a dilemma, but I'm just telling you how to strike a balance. It happens. Then equity versus efficiency, that public officials, public administration, public bodies, when it comes to frame policies, they can go for equity and fairness. The focus is more on equity and fairness. People are treated, equitably, equal treatment in equal situation and circumstances, and sometimes equity and fairness may demand that the policymakers should opt for positive discrimination in favor of weaker and underprivileged sections of society. So what you are doing for a weaker underprivileged section of society, you are denying the same to others. Positive discrimination is required. Why? To bring the weaker underprivileged section of society in the mainstream of our socio-economic and political life. If there is so much of gap, then gap has to be bridged by positive discrimination. So on the one hand, equity demands that you go for sometimes positive discrimination. Okay? And on the other hand, the concern for efficiency, it demands that instead of going for discrimination, positive discrimination, you should focus mainly on input and output. We have to maximize output and we have to minimize the input, or with the same amount of input, time, money, energy, you have to get best of the results, maximization of output. So this is your equity versus efficiency. So efficiency and cost effectiveness would demand that you should forget about equity and fairness and positive discrimination, weaker section, underprivileged section. So this is the dilemma, what to do. Okay, so this is the problem. So generally in India, what happens, we always struggle, we try to strike the balance between the two. Much depends on the ideology of the political party in power. And these days, every political party, it seems that they are competing against one another to prove that they are the ultimate savior of the cause of justice or for the equity or fairness, and efficiency and effectiveness is not so much a matter of concern. So it happens at some places they are concerned here with better administration, performance evaluation, performance review, and technological upgradation. We keep talking about that, but in reality, political parties are more oriented towards the drama of equity and fairness. Better to say that if they are allowed to go, then one day it is not something that we cannot imagine. That one day you'll find reservations will go to the extent of 80% or 90%. And there are political parties who have gone to the extent of demanding. कोई प्रॉब्लम ही नहीं है. पॉपुलेशन का जो स्ट्रेंथ है हर जाति का जितना है उसके हिसाब से आप बांट दीजिए उसमें. ऐसे महानुभाव हैं. ठीक है. सो आपको पता ही होगा, if you tilt the scale too much in favor of this side or that side, negative consequences will certainly follow. Governance is all about avoiding the extremes. Sometimes you are required to opt for extreme kind of course of action. Okay, but emergency situation or that situation may come for some time, but being on the extreme cannot be a perpetual policy. Impossible. You will have to balance out things. For some time you can go to some extreme, but again after the phase is over, you need to come back to occupy the middle position between the extremes. So this is the reality. Policy making, your equity versus efficiency, and then you have responsiveness versus accountability. Responsiveness versus accountability. If you want to improve the level of responsiveness of your administration, field officials functionaries at different levels, they are required to be given adequate discretionary power so that they could decide the things, they could adapt to the local conditions or the given situation, they could decide the things on their own, and in this way you can achieve a high level of responsiveness, because socio-economic, political conditions, cultural conditions, local conditions, nothing remains static. Everything keep evolving over time. Policy making is done at the top. Sometimes policy makers are found to be not so much aware of the ground realities, and those who are involved in the implementation of policy, they are exposed to the kind of condition which was never anticipated by the policymakers. So here, those who are involved in implementers, they are required to be given adequate discretionary power to improve the level of responsiveness for everything. If they are asked to seek orders and permission from the headquarter, then level of responsiveness will go down. So on the one hand, the option is to empower them, to give them more discretionary power, and on the other hand, you focus more on accountability, that now you have to conform to established predetermined rules and regulations, conventions. You need to follow that and never deviate from the path of rules and procedures. Why? To enforce accountability. So on the one hand, there is a concern to improve the level of responsiveness by giving them power. कोई प्रॉब्लम है, आप अपने हिसाब से देख करके आप उसको तुरंत सॉल्व कीजिए, मतलब प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व होना चाहिए, बार बार हर बात के लिए मत आया कीजिए. रिस्पॉन्सिवनेस. एंड ऑन द अदर हैंड यू फोकस मोर ऑन अकाउंटेबिलिटी. नहीं, आप बिल्कुल जो रूल्स रेगुलेशंस प्रोसीजर है आप उसके अनुसार काम करें. इफ़ यू डेविएट, any kind of deviation from the predetermined path of rules, regulations, procedures will be seriously, it will take in cognizance of, your accountability will be enforced, you may be punished for that. तो दोनों के बीच क्या किया जाए? If you go for responsiveness, efficiency will be better and people will be satisfied. Public को वही चाहिए, responsiveness, आप कोई रास्ता निकालें. And if you go for the accountability, then officials in the headquarters satisfied that things are stable, things are safe, everything is taking place as per the rules and regulation, but responsiveness will be lost. This is the difference. So you are required to choose between the two. And then finally you have stability versus change. Stability, that organizational behavior in general is motivated by the necessity to rationalize the things, to routinize the thing. Why? To achieve stability, to achieve regularity, to achieve predictability. Because change, reform, these are very dangerous words in the world of bureaucracy. Because the moment you think of change or reforms, it means that you will have to face some kind of resistance. You will have to deprogram many things. You will have to go for reprogramming. You have to restructure the things. When you come up with a new model, then accordingly new set of rules and regulations are required to be framed. So on the one hand, there is a concern for stability. We are focused more on being reliable, being predictable, being regular, and on the other hand, changing environmental conditions, Darwin's principle, survival of the fittest. The demands that to survive you have to remain fit, and to achieve that fitness you have to be change oriented. So from time to time you should make an assessment of how much relevant you are to the external environment, and if required you should make appropriate changes in your nature of response. There can be changes, you can bring changes in the structural aspect of organization, the procedure, rules, regulations, behavior, or equation or relationship with the environment. So there are two things. On the one hand, stability, on the other hand, change. But all of us know that there is another way to look at the things, that there is nothing like stability versus change, because progress is all about bringing stability amid change and change amid stability. ऐसे तो लगभग सारी जगह पे आप ऐसी बात कर सकते हैं, बट इन जनरल वी आर ट्राइंग टू एक्सप्लेन. हम आपको समझाने की कोशिश करें कि दो एक्सट्रीम्स हैं, दोनों के अपने अपने एडवांटेज और डिसएडवांटेज हैं. इन दोनों के बीच एक बैलेंस करना पड़ता है. देखिए, स्टेबिलिटी, concern for stability, because the greater the stability, the more will be the trust and confidence. Because you become easily predictable. If you are predictable, things are certain, things are regular, so public trust and confidence will be very high. And if you go for the change in future, society will certainly be benefited if it is a progressive change. But to begin with, howsoever good the things may be, but it leads to some kind of, it invites some kind of resistance. बिकॉज इंसान बेहद संवेदनशील प्राणी है। आप अच्छी अच्छी बात भी सिखाएंगे, लेकिन बदलाव से एक घबराहट और एक बदलाव से डर उसके अंदर होता है। तो रेजिस्टेंस टू चेंज टेक प्लेस बिकॉज ओवर ए पीरियड ऑफ टाइम वी गेट एक्लेमेटाइज टू सर्टेन कंडीशंस। वो अगर बहुत अच्छा नहीं भी है तो भी लोग उसके साथ ढल जाते हैं। इसलिए देयर इज ऑलवेज रेजिस्टेंस टू चेंज। सो स्टेबिलिटी ऑन द वन हैंड एंड चेंज ऑन द अदर। इफ यू मूव मोर टुवर्ड्स स्टेबिलिटी, ठीक है, सो पब्लिक ट्रस्ट एंड कॉन्फिडेंस विल बी हाई, but if you are but you will be losing in terms of dynamism. And if you are change oriented, you will be dynamic, you will be able to deal with the situation in a much better way. Today you may be facing problem, but tomorrow you will be much better placed. Okay, so stability and change, if you go for the change, then a lot of resistance will be there. So both of them have their merits and demerits. So generally best policy is the one wherein you strike fine balance between stability and change, because progress is all about bringing change amid stability and stability amid change. If any organization or system is not change oriented, if it is not change oriented, it prefers to remain stable. The stability will not remain stability for long if it is not change oriented. That stability in the course of time will become stagnancy. So stability minus change is stagnancy, and you know very well what is stagnancy. Stagnancy is death. What's the difference? So these are the dilemmas. Organizations are very frequently exposed to this kind of problems, but most of the organizations, as we know, they are neither completely centralized nor completely decentralized, not so much oriented towards stability only or change only. So all organizations need to strike fine balance between these two extreme set of values. They are required to strike fine balance. But as I discussed, that the point of balance is not always in the middle. The point of balance may be in the given situation. Point of balance may demand that you move more towards this side or that side. Sometimes decentralization may be more advisable than centralization to strike fine balance between the things. So in public administration and governance, it is very much like a flow concept, that in the given set of situations, circumstances, conditions, your goals, objectives, or number of factors are required to be taken into consideration, and then you decide what is the meaning of a balanced decision in the given situation. Sometimes where you are not balanced, you go to the extremes. It is required. Going to the extreme end is required to balance out the things. पाकिस्तान के साथ थोड़ा बैलेंस आउट करने के लिए ज़रूरी था कि इनको थोड़ी सेवा मिलती, और इंडियन आर्मी ने सेवा पहले दी थी, सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक, उसके बाद भी नहीं मान रहे थे। तो बैलेंसिंग एक्ट यही था कि बालाकोट एयर स्ट्राइक, जब 2 बार स्ट्राइक हुआ तो इनके बाद समझ में आई कि भारत अब पहले वाला भारत नहीं है कि 2-4 नेता कहीं से निकल करके आ जाएंगे और आके वही बोलेंगे ये कायरना हरकत है, भारत में लोकतंत्र की जड़ें बड़ी मजबूत हैं और हम जो भी कल्प्रिट है, जिसने भी ऐसा घृणित अपराध किया है, हम उसे एक न एक दिन पकड़ेंगे, गिरफ्तार करेंगे। सब बातें टेररिस्ट हंसते होंगे सब उधर कि ठीक है ये तो कोई भी नेता आके बोलेगा, लेकिन ऐसा हमेशा हुआ नहीं। एक नई सरकार आई, एक नेशनलिस्ट गवर्नमेंट, उसने पॉइंट ऑफ बैलेंस को समझा कि अब बैलेंस का मतलब ये है कि हम इन्हें सबक सिखाएंगे, इनके घर में घुस के मारेंगे। तो फिर देखिए बैलेंस कितना अच्छा चला कुछ समय, फिर हरकत चालू होंगी तो है ही, इसकी व्यवस्था ही ऐसी है, फिर कोई पनिशमेंट देना पड़ेगा और ये बैलेंस चलता रहेगा। धीरे धीरे करते करते हो सकता है कि भविष्य में कुछ बुद्धि आ जाए, उनकी फॉरेन पॉलिसी जो है वो फॉरेन पॉलिसी जैसी कोई चीज़ वहाँ डेवलप हो कि फॉरेन पॉलिसी में और भी बहुत सारी चीज़ें आती हैं, केवल इंडिया नहीं होता, एक नेबरिंग कंट्री, ठीक है। तो इस तरह की चीज़ें होती हैं। तो पॉइंट ऑफ बैलेंस हमेशा ये नहीं है कि हम आपसी बातचीत से बीच का रास्ता निकालेंगे। कभी कभी पॉइंट ऑफ बैलेंस का मतलब बातचीत नहीं करना होता है, एक्सट्रीम तक ले जाना होता है और फिर आप वहाँ से वापस फिर पॉइंट ऑफ बैलेंस ढूंढते हैं। अभी इजराइल ऐसे ही कर रहा है, दुनिया को जो भी लगे, लेकिन इजराइल क्या कर रहा है, इजराइल पॉइंट ऑफ बैलेंस ही ढूंढ रहा है। उसे पता है कि बैलेंस आउट करने के लिए अगले 10 साल के लिए ज़रूरी है कि फ़िलहाल अभी हमास हैं या हिजबुल्लाह हैं, इनको वो सबक सिखाना होगा, इसलिए वो अपनी पॉलिसी पे चल रहे हैं। ठीक है, दुनिया हल्ला करती रहे लेकिन वो तो एक के बाद एक स्ट्राइक कर रहे हैं, तो हो सकता है बहुत सक्सेसफुल भी हों कि इसके बाद जो शांति आएगी वो लंबे समय तक चलेगी, कि उनको पता है कि इनको छेड़ने का मतलब क्या होगा। तो इसलिए कभी कभी उस बैलेंस को अचीव करने के लिए आपको बैलेंस वाली पॉलिसी को छोड़ करके कहीं आगे जाना पड़ता है, या तो यूँ कहें कि पॉइंट ऑफ बैलेंस शिफ्ट कर जाता है और बाद में फिर उसको आप बीच में, यही है पूरी कहानी। तो डिलेमास तो है ये सब ये, लेकिन इनके बीच का बैलेंस हर गवर्नमेंट, हर सरकार को अपने अपने तरीके से ढूंढना पड़ता है। देयर इज नो there cannot be an ideal policy to be followed by all the governments. This is something wherein decisions are required to be taken by political and administrative leadership in the light of peculiarities of situations, circumstances which surround administration and governance. I hope the point is clear. और उसके लास्ट में 6 old chestnuts encapsulates enduring dilemmas of public administration, ये हम डिस्कस कर चुके हैं। सो अच्छी बात की है कि द टू एक्सट्रीम्स आर प्रॉपरली एक्सप्लेन्ड, कि आप सेंट्रलाइजेशन और डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन में जाते हैं तो क्या होगा। विदाउट नोइंग द टू एक्सट्रीम्स यू कैन नॉट आइडेंटिफाई द मिडिल पॉइंट। दिस इज द सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ दिस कॉन्सेप्ट 6 old chestnuts। वन क्लियर? ए मोर प्रोफाउंड एनालिसिस, अगर आप बहुत अच्छे से एनालिसिस करेंगे देन यू विल रियलाइज, एक पॉइंट पे आप ये भी कह सकते हैं कि व्हाट अपीयर्स टू बी कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी टू वन अनदर, इट इज एक्चुअली नॉट कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी, दीज आर कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री टू वन अनदर। यू कैन नॉट अंडरस्टैंड द सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ वन इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ अदर। नो डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन कैन बी सक्सेसफुल without some amount of centralization. No stability is stability without some kind of change. No change will be fruitful unless in the course of time it is stabilized. So things are not so much contradictory, they are complementary as well. Point clear? So rest of things you can do on your own. Good. Thank you.